The reason why ChatGPT in 2022 was a really good, better Google was because it wasn't just taking your words. It was trying to discern the context of why you were asking a question. You now have this context that lives on your computer. It's being empowered to basically use the computer as its own personal resource. And the major improvement for these models across time is they're getting larger context windows. 2-3 years ago, that wouldn't be possible.
I want somebody now who will say, this tool will allow me to get so much more done.
Yeah.
I am going to create these automations. I'm going to take advantage of this. If you don't want to get laid off in the next 5 years, you must tinker. Because if you as a leader are not thinking about the second order effects of these things, or starting to, you are not doing yourself a favor.
Becca and Rob from AnchorWatch, welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, yeah.
You've both been here for Cheatcode. What was your experience like at Cheatcode?
It's great. Rob's, this is Rob's third
time in Bedford.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First Cheatcode in Bedford. I went to the Cheatcode in Australia last year, but for Cheatcode, it was my first Cheatcode Bedford. But anytime we were in London for work, like visiting the Lloyd's insurance markets, I always try to come a day early or leave a day later to be able to see the games. But
Yeah.
I love that town.
And Becca, this is your first time?
First
at
time.
Cheatcode?
First time. So yeah, cute town. Really enjoyed being up there, getting to meet, the local Bitcoin folks that had come out to learn and listen and have conversation. That was really good. And then seeing the soccer was really great.
Football.
So.
I mean,
That's all right. That's all right.
Us locals, we kind of make fun about the appeal of Bedford, but it really is nice. It's a nice, quaint, typical British town, an English town, shall we say. And but for the Bitcoin conference, we really, take it over and make it our own. But specifically because it's such a small and intimate affair, you get to know a lot of people, especially if you're not really, networked or connected, which is most people on Twitter, isn't it? So you can get to meet like all sorts of people.
Yeah, the people, and since everyone's coming around, mostly the UK, maybe Europe, everyone's so polite and just very excited to be able to talk to you. And this conference is unique where there's not like 6 stages and a bunch of things you have to run around and do. You get a lot of time just to have long, thoughtful conversations with the locals. And they're always very appreciative of the time. People are walking up to me asking me like technical Bitcoin custody questions or just talking about anything in life in general. And they're all very nice and approachable. It's a great group of people.
I actually like single stage events.
Same.
So, I think I can understand the opposite. I can understand companies and authors of books. Everybody's trying to get on stage and have their opportunity to talk about what they're doing. But in terms of attending, a single stage is great. You sit down and you tend to listen. As a speaker, when we speak at those events, we experience that on the other side. People are very engaged and in their seats listening. I think when there's a million stages and people getting pulled in different directions and maybe trying to run between stages to catch something, they end up just giving up on the content and focusing on the networking. But
the best part of any conference always are the side conversations you have and not what's on stage. And unless it's a small conference that has like a no recording policy where you can't watch it later, I very seldomly make an effort to like watch every conversation because I want to be there in person, engage with people. And then on the flight home, I'll just watch the stream and I'll watch the talks that I missed, right? To be able to see the content I want. That's usually my bias at a conference.
And I don't at all. That's why I like the single stage event, is because I find myself actually sitting down. If I don't have a meeting going on, if I'm not actively in a conversation, I'll sit down and listen to the content and listen to the speakers. Because once I'm on the flight home, there's no way I'm watching. I'm watching recordings. I'm either getting back to work, or I'm trying to catch up on sleep. I enjoyed the event. I thought it was very, very well put on. Good production value. And
thank you, Jess.
Yes, thank you, Jess.
Jay-Z.
Well done. Yes, I thought it was excellent.
Yeah, it was my first time on stage, and I have to echo your sentiments actually, because if there were multiple stages, I probably wouldn't have met as many other speakers as well, because that's a key point for me. I know a lot of people think, oh, it's a big account, so he probably knows everybody already. I don't know anybody. Like I've been operating this account anonymously for 5 years.
You will.
Yeah.
We talked previously about how, several years into doing AnchorWatch now and traveling around on behalf of AnchorWatch. The speakers have become our friends, our personal friends, and And so going to events is actually amazing from that standpoint as well, as it's our opportunity to catch up with people and appreciate each other on a personal level.
So today, specifically, we brought you in to talk about AI. Everyone's talking about AI. Hardly anyone's actually implementing it, using it in their businesses day to day. And so we want to talk about that. But before we do, we need some context about your business. So tell us about what AnchorWatch is. Give us the spiel, but also, it's the operating context as well, how old it is, what you're looking to do. And then when we start talking about AI, people will have a better understanding of the context in which you're operating.
Yeah. So AnchorWatch is an old nautical term referring to the crew of sailors who watch the ship when it's at anchor, at port, or at anchor, whatever, right? And that kind of communicates the big theme here. But what that is keeping Bitcoin safe. And we have built, there's two main pieces of our business. We have built our own Bitcoin native custody infrastructure. I feel pretty good and confident in saying it's the most secure, large, enterprise, custody system that's out there today. And we can get into the details as to why. And we offer insurance to that. We are Lloyd's of London cover holders, and we're able to uniquely offer one-to-one insurance in your name with the policy directly from Lloyd's of London to protect your Bitcoin.
Mm.
And when we launched to the public last year, I'd say that combined product is what people know us for. So if you think of all the capabilities that a super high-tech, super secure enterprise-grade custody system can do, obviously it can custody. It can keep Bitcoin very safe in cold storage, but there's all sorts of different capabilities that need a secure custody layer at the base of it. So a Bitcoin-backed loan, where's the collateral being held? And so there's all sorts of capabilities that we have because of the tech solution. We can ensure any Bitcoin that's being held in our tech solution on the custody platform, but we're a Lloyd's of London cover holder, as Rob mentioned, and we can do custom insurance policies. We can craft things to meet businesses where they are. So think of it as a Venn diagram. We've got our insurance capabilities, we've got our custody capabilities. What people know us for is pretty much the little overlap of those two things. They know us for insured custody, but really we have, we can fill out that entire Venn diagram, if you will, and continue expanding our business into different capabilities that take advantage of both, take advantage of our insurance capabilities and custody.
And the one just short thing I would add to that is that for any financial service or any use of Bitcoin, custody really sits at the foundation of anything you're trying to do, whether it's a loan, escrow, any sort of futures contract, any sort of financial product you're building on Bitcoin, custody is the foundation. If you don't have good custody, then the rest of it doesn't really matter.
Yep.
And so we've been really, laying a foundation, pouring that concrete, letting it set and be stable for us to be able to kind of look forward into the future on that custody side, and then also bundling with insurance, or maybe not even using our custody platform, but also just getting insurance.
And Becca, you're the Chief Operating Officer of AnchorWatch, and you've got a very strong background in operations, special projects, and retail. Just give us a quick overview so we get some context of your experience.
Sure. So my career has definitely had some phases. So the first 10 years of my career, I was an apparel merchant, so doing both the financial planning, forecasting, of apparel at kind of the corporate level, and then also actually choosing the style. So planning the fashion aspect of it. Then I went over to Starbucks. We've chatted about that. Spent 10 years at Starbucks, all at corporate, doing a variety of different tasks. But one of those roles that I had at Starbucks for 3 years was implementing 26 systems, different pieces of software, hooking those up together that orchestrated all of the company's outbound spend, with the exception of mainland China. But there was a very operational aspect to the systems themselves. So I think as we get into the conversation, we'll definitely go back into that, into kind of how a COO or really kind of back office team should be or is starting to think about these tools.
And Rob, you're in effect the technical partner, but also the CEO. So how did you get to that position?
A brief background in my career. My first job besides bussing tables, that was my first job at 14. I was actually a video game referee. I got flown around the States working at Major League Gaming. It was like the dream job for a high schooler. Like, we're going to pay you a little per diem and fly you around the country to watch people play video games. And that was at Major League Gaming back when esports was starting to become a really big thing. It's like 2005 to 2015. But even I went to college, got a double major math and econ, and then I went and started working for them, managing their ad server. So it's just a job I could do to help them out. Like, when you would sell sponsorship contracts, you'd run a live stream. We were actually kind of the first to pilot video ads and live streams. We were like piloting that with Google because we would get, 100,000 people back in like 2009 watching these streams, and we would want to serve ads. I did that for a couple of years. I did bounced around ad tech, as it's called, for a while. And then I went to go work at IBM as a consultant and turned that into being a data scientist and consultant. And my Bitcoin journey just briefly started around 2014. I had I was a big Ron Paul and the Fed gold bug guy. And a couple of my buddies would tell me to check out Bitcoin. I was like, too complicated. Like, I'm not going to get into that. And then Dogecoin came out, and all of our friends had gaming computers. And so we would all mine Dogecoin. And I realized that, like, with the Comic Sans font and the rainbow color, like, this was like, I knew internet culture that this was satire. So I was like, okay, this is satirizing something. Let me go learn the real thing. And I started going to the New York City Bitcoin developer meetup in end of 2013, start of 2014. And that was kind of my opening into Bitcoin. And going into those Bit Devs meetings, there would be maybe 10 to 20 people in a room, and just going very passionately talking about all of these concepts like decentralization and security and cryptography, things that maybe I was a little bit aware of, but this was such a serious application of all these principles and designing the software that I fell in love immediately. So I started going, to all of those meetings, starting to learn about Bitcoin. And that was I never really intersected my professional career with Bitcoin until starting AnchorWatch at the start of 2022. So during COVID, and all of the lockdowns in the States, there was a big social audio app called Clubhouse. And that's where I met Becca, met like all of our initial angel investors. And the whole story for AnchorWatch came out of that. But I was always in those Clubhouse rooms, like someone who understood the technical nuances of how Bitcoin works. And through that, realized that there was a really good opportunity to apply that in the domain of not just maybe working at a Bitcoin company, but starting one.
It's more than 2 years now since ChatGPT launched, and it was really quite an explosion. A lot of attention, massive adoption. It's almost like vertical line of adoption. But, it quickly just settled into being an advanced form of search for most people, right?
Better Google.
Yeah, a much better Google. And you're like, okay, that's fine. But now I guess it's almost like the second stage with the advent of, is it OpenClaw?
OpenClaw is the
whatever.
OpenClaw. No, OpenClaw, the agent model, the self-hosted agent model.
That's right. Yeah, and so I don't think we saw as much. I think when ChatGPT came out, there was a huge level of interest, and then with the development of the visual model, say like Midjourney, there's a lot of hype around that, and then video, but nothing really quite matched that initial launch. I think, as from my point of view, as much as the Claw launch did. What are the implications of, first of all, just ChatGPT style models, but then the agentic models, and what can we do with those things right now?
If we talk about how people kind of went through that transformation. So originally, you're right. I think people were using it as a better Google. And I think I would say maybe throughout this conversation, it's almost important to have two answers, because I feel like there's a lot of things that Rob, as a developer, as an engineer, is going to have very different answers than I, which, let's just call me a normie. I'm a technically savvy normie. I think that's
but
fair.
You're focused. You're more,
I'm not
in
technical.
The realm of ideas and words.
I don't know any code. All right. So if that's how we're defining technical, is I don't know code whatsoever. And so, yes, initially I would say normies were using chat as a better Google, and it took some months to figure out how to use the better Google and really how to appreciate how much better it was. And so I think there was a little bit of learning there. And then there was a lot of flurry of activity that I'm not even sure I would have been aware of if I didn't work in a tech company where, Rob was starting to go into, various aspects, which he can talk about himself. And you could tell he was getting very excited, right? Like, so he was going down rabbit holes and coming up and being like, this is amazing, more or less. Just like so excited and telling us what the future was going to look like. This is what's going to happen. And it was just like, slow down there, slow down there. And then I think, actually, I got a little bit of I would say, a preview when Rob pulled our team together and introduced the non-technical team to Cursor, which was some tooling that developed. Yeah, it was developer-focused tooling, but it was enough of, we'll say like a chat style wrapper on top of it that for the first time, Rob could see how non-technical people would start entering. And I was very curious about it. And I started playing on it, and then I got very sick. And so I kind of stopped just because of medical issues pulling me away. When I recovered from that, I kind of recovered and woke back up from a couple of months of just being unwell right as Cowork, right as Claude, the new model in desktop came out. And people will talk about this big change over the last couple of months as being Claude Cowork. I actually think that is a misnomer. I think Cowork was released at the same time as other things, but I think the real change was actually just Claude Desktop. And so you download a desktop app. Suddenly, it was, again, just a very basic tooling on top of these capabilities that made it normie friendly. Specifically, you put a desktop app on your computer, but the files that you create, that you upload to train things, live in the cloud. What that means is I can now use it when I travel on my laptop. I can use it on my desktop at home. I can invite my team to join a project and to contribute to a project, just like you would share a Google Drive document. And so something as simple as that, just organization and a wrapper, like nothing really advanced from my point of view. Just that was enough that suddenly you could use it as a non-technical worker. I could start to organize things. I could work with my team and delegate things. And it really kind of changed from being a novelty or a personal tool to suddenly a collaborative tool, which really does change everything. So that was a big aha. And then I think as we go on, we can talk about how operators, how my team is starting to get more towards the code side. But let me pause and talk about kind of Rob's entry into it, maybe.
Yeah, I would even just take one big step back and to talk about your question about ChatGPT versus OpenClaw. Why even GPT is a better Google. In the initial, in 2022 when this came out, the reason why, in many of these things, of the step functions of improvement, beyond just the quality of the models, but the user experience and kind of the distribution of these tools that are becoming more commonplace, is the word context. The reason why ChatGPT in 2022 was a really good, better Google was because it wasn't just taking your words. It was trying to discern the context of why you were asking a question and use that for how the answers get returned to you. At a very, very high level, these models are what's called stateless, which means it doesn't have any active memory. You have this large neural network model that you put something in, you get something out. And I'm not sure if most people realize when you talk to one of these, if you talk to it and it responds to you and you say something again, what you're doing is you're taking the initial question, the response that it gave you, and your follow-up question are all being put into the model at once. And that's more context. If you're having a dialogue.
Repetitively. So it's building on itself. It's constantly reprocessing the entire conversation.
Exactly.
At every new request or engagement.
Exactly. And the reason why that's important is because that's more context of understanding what the conversation is about. And in 2022, it became a better search very quickly because of that. Because you were building on a conversation. Then I would say the next big step forward were these tools where you were pulling something onto your computer. And to Becca's point about why Claude Desktop in particular is good, the early phases of these, when you would interact with them, maybe you could drag and drop a file and it could have that as context. What ultimately, though, what happened is when it lives on your desktop, rather than having to go to a chat history and find the conversation and pull it in, you're able to retain context across conversations, as well as the friction of adding context to the model went down a lot. Not just I'm uploading this document or this conversation, but also when I get an output and I curate a really good response, that doesn't just live on a server somewhere now. I now have what's called a markdown file, which is a formatted text file, which lives on my computer. And this is where you start seeing the recursive loops of abilities like skills and everything else, like starts building on each other. On the developer side in 2022, I started toying with these things. The issue, though, is the domain of language for conversation versus code, whereas code is very strict and it has to work or not. And so throughout 22 and through 23, really, it would be able to build up maybe a basic prototype, but there would be many, many headaches and friction points. Like this is where the common thing of like, it's hallucinating, which like became very part of conversations. The thing to pay attention to here, though, is not just this is now existing, but the rate of acceleration of improvement. And it's funny, like you're saying that you were sick and then you came back. That's when we had another major step function up, like in that time. So, I had a similar dynamic with my wife where she went on maternity leave, came back, and she was gone for 3 months. I was like, you need to do this. Like, you need to check this out. And specifically for OpenClaw, that just took it to the next level. So rather than me having a conversation, whatever, you now have this context that lives on your computer, and it's being empowered to basically use the computer as its own personal resource to go out and do other things, whether it's searching web, whether it's writing code, or maybe there's an ask you make of it and it says, okay, I will every day at 7 a.m., send you a text about a briefing of what happened overnight. To do that, though, it's writing a program to do that, storing that program on the computer, and then calling out to that 7 a.m. every morning, right? And the further autonomy you give these machines to like have access to a computer to be able to run things, the better able it's to manage context and build things and kind of figure out the most optimal way of executing things. And that ultimately empowers you. And that's kind of like these continual step functions, let alone just when a new model comes out, the major jump you get in improvement. And one last thing, the major improvement for these models across time is they're getting larger context windows, meaning you're now in a position where you would quickly overwhelm it and you wouldn't be able to add more information. You'd have to drop information. They're getting more and more context, which is allowing it more memory, right? And these are the things where now we're at a point where even large, complicated code bases are able to be in one session, all be persisted at the same time. Whereas 2-3 years ago, that wouldn't be possible.
It gets then, I would say, further complicated because of the rate of change, because nothing is final yet, right? Everything is very fluid, that even, as a non-technical person, there's model development. And so how well the context and the recursive nature of the models is improving. So you can have decisions of what model is best or what model do I want to use, what model is smartest. But then there's tooling and tooling developments, and different companies have developed different tooling. And so, for example, right now, actively kind of this week, I've been largely using Claude Desktop and the chat and co-work functions of it. I don't yet use code, though I think I will. But Perplexity came out with Computer, and they have different pros and cons or different capabilities. But I'm confident that's a temporary thing, right? So it's how much do you dive in and learn and optimize and build to learn versus build to implement when there might be something very much better on the near horizon. So for example, Claude Desktop is a desktop app, but the files live in the cloud. But when it executes tasks, it creates a virtual machine on your computer, on your physical computer, and it runs on your computer, which means your computer needs to be awake and active doing that work. You have to take that into account. Perplexity Computer, the virtual machine is in their cloud. And so if you are creating, say, repetitive tasks that you want happening overnight and you don't have your own server rack, maybe if the capabilities of the model are similar, and Perplexity, by the way, computer lets you use other models, so you're not constrained by that. If you really need that ability that the cloud-based virtual machine provides, which again for normies is more about when it runs, not on your local machine, then maybe you need to use that. And the other thing is one of the two models has the ability to actually make changes on your personal computer, right? Which has pros and cons and security things to consider, but can also help you create things, right? Because I don't code. So it can just do things to my computer to implement what I'm wanting. The other one can browse the internet and can control the internet. So there's plugins, there's a Claude plugin for Chrome, or Perplexity has Comet Browser, which has those abilities mixed in. So just right now, it's very, very agile. So I think as leaders, we're both assessing the new tools. Our team is starting to use new tools, which is exciting, and seeing what they're creating. But watching how both of our teams are using these tools is giving us both in our respective roles big eyes, right? Because there's a lot of implications for all these things. And maybe just the very last thing I would go back to your original question, because I think a lot of people just don't understand yet this term agentic and what we're even talking about. So when people are using chat, they're just having a conversation, right? And if you're using Claude Chat, you're still just having a conversation. When you think about agents or sub-agents or skills, these are all ways to indicate that you are training a very limited task, and you are trying to narrow the context window so that it can't mess up, so it can't hallucinate and make mistakes. And so OpenClaw, I've never used, so Rob can speak to OpenClaw in particular, but that was, I would say, the big technical agent builder infrastructure, whereas now I will be starting to use either Claude or computer to do it in the normie way.
Yeah, I guess what I would briefly add to that is when you're having a conversation with either ChatGPT or Claude AI, you're just having a chat dialogue back and forth conversation. It just sits there and it doesn't leave that. It just leaves, it's that conversation, that's it. An agent is taking the capability of these chat models and saying, I want you to take the steering wheel and go build and do things, right? That is the next level of kind of breaking things out. So maybe in 2022, if you were writing code, what you first had to do initially was you'd had to take your block of code, copy it in, ask a question, take the answer, copy it out, put it back in, check and see if it works, and kind of do that as your loop. The agent model, in these, maybe what's also called a harness, if you've heard of Claude Code or Open Code, Codex is OpenAI's, is that we're saying, okay, we want you to run these large language models, but here is the code base. And maybe even if you're talking an OpenClaw saying, here is your computer, now go do a bunch of things. The one thing, because we're just talking about skills, the way I view skills, and what these, you're training them on a specific subdomain or task. You give these ultimately all distill down to what's called a markdown file, which is a fancy formatted text file. And these markdown files, what you're doing is you're adding context. So you have this stateless model. It has no memory or things, but you're saying, hey, you are a leading expert in insurance, or you are an expert in Bitcoin custody, right? You're giving it guardrails to go through the infinite universe of what this model's potential is, and you're immediately gating it in and saying, this is your focus. You are a QA, quality analyst for code. You're just a tester, right? And what you can do is you can take the same model and give it different skills, and it can then narrow the scope of what it actually does. And the way I view skills is if you think about a craftsman has a big tool belt, maybe a hammer and a wrench and a screwdriver, and they're all kind of circling around his belt. What it is you go to the model and say, hey, use this tool. Or you can have a tool that isn't just an agent personality. It can be, I want you to run, some early examples of what I've done is I want you to use these tools to go through and verify a Bitcoin address. And this is exactly what you do, and make sure it follows X, Y, and Z spec. And I give it context around the business. And then when these kind of questions come up, rather than from first principles thinking, how do I solve this problem? What it does is it'll look through its skills list and see what skills do I have. And that's like a craftsman looking at the tool belt wrapped around his waist and saying, here's my tool that does this thing, right? Yeah. And because it's language domain, it's like the instructions of these skill files are not code. In these skill files, you can have sections and say, run code like this or run code like this. But you don't have to give it specific code instructions if you're not using it for specific code things. But what you're able to do, though, is kind of encode these different personalities to start thinking about things. And over time, realistically, as you're improving on these things, you are going to inevitably have pieces of code that get peppered into them saying, I want you to make this call specifically to look at my calendar, or I want you to specifically look at this formatting code for how I write like things in general, right? For like code format. So that's like the general mental model I like to give people, is that these skill files are like tools on a tool belt, and the agent, as it walks through problems, will be able to understand like, this is what I need to go look at and do.
And maybe a real life example.
That's what I wanted to get.
Yeah. So here's, let's say I want to use AI to help me develop new insurance policy. And, first of all, AI, there's a whole new thing to think about of, at what point you do legal reviews, there's all sorts of change, right? But let's say I'm going to use AI. That's my goal. I want to use AI to help me write this new insurance policy. I already know the policy I want to write. I know what I want to cover. So I might have a normal chat that you're very familiar with to set the context for that. But in terms of agents or sub-agents or skills, let's say that, and the way I think of it in my head is, the more generalist an agent is, the more tasks. I think of it more human, and probably over time I'll name them to have a name, right?
Well, I was watching a video by a guy called Alex Finn. He's really prominent online, doing tutorials and stuff. And he literally names every single agent. He has a chief of staff with the name.
Yeah.
And the chief of staff. He only speaks to the chief of staff, who then commandeers all the other agents.
Kind of. I mean, that's one way to do it for sure. But yeah, the more of a generalist it is, I think of it more as a human. And then if I'm getting into sub-agents or tasks, I really don't. I think of it as like a thing. So in terms of the policy example, maybe I would set up a project in Claude Desktop. And that's where I'm uploading my the previous policies that we've written, maybe some context from the internet on research that I did, our prior conversations as I was planning for it. And overall, I have an agent who takes those things and will spit out a insurance policy for me. But I start looking at it and, man, it's hallucinated some crazy stuff. And it's, oh man, this needs so much review. It's a legal document. So it's, and so what you can do, for example, is in an insurance policy, there's a definition list. There's a prescribed formats for these documents. It's regulated. And so it must have definitions. And so we put a lot of attention into those definitions. They have to be extremely accurate because they drive really the rest of the document. So what you can do then is, for example, develop a dictionary sub-agent. So you could name the dictionary a name if you want to, or you can just think of the sub-agent is the dictionary. And so then I would train a sub-agent to say, you are the dictionary. Your job is, when I create policy, you are to take our approved list of definitions that I've written before, and maybe to train this dictionary skill, I'll upload all the current definitions, and then based on my aspirations for what I want to do, it will help me identify new words that I need to define, and I'll work on those. So you'll use AI to make the dictionary better, the actual list of definitions better. And then once you have it, you say, that's its job, is you are the keeper of the definitions. And I can either manually, when I get to the point that I think I have a good policy, I could say, hey, run the definition or run the dictionary skill. And it would go through my policy and it would tell me anything in the policy might contradict are definitions where I might need to look, or it might tell me, it will go through and it will not allow a word to be misdefined because it only had one job. Its only job was to make sure the definitions in the policy match the approved list. And then maybe I'll have a second agent whose job is to check the document for that.
Are you creating, do you think of it as kind of like an agentic org structure and line of command?
I don't yet. Right now I view it as tasks.
They all report to you, sort of thing. All these agents feed back to you.
I'm not there in my head yet. I know many people do. They kind of see themselves as CEO. The first time I drew it out, it was both work, but my personal life too. And so, I drew myself in the middle as CEO, and I just moved away from it. That mental model didn't help me.
What got in the way?
I just think it's unnecessary.
We talk premature.
Yeah, we talk a lot about different neuro abnormality, atypical thinking. I'm super ADD, right? So I've always described my brain as being a cloud, and so when I learn something new, I just throw it up there, and I just let it flow, and then my brain takes care of connecting the synapses on itself. And so that is how my brain works. And when I got into prematurely identifying agents and roles, it just wasn't helpful because my brain is still in accumulation mode on this topic right now. I'm still learning. I'm still like drinking from the fire hose and throwing things up there. Now, maybe later when we've figured out exactly what we're going to do in a professional sense, maybe I will get to the point that I've got these X number of human people reporting to me and then these Y number of AI agents reporting to me, but I'm not there.
I would say in general, like the comment about it being premature is not that you can't get productive output today. What I would encourage for people in general is to start iteratively tinkering, because this is an entire new domain in how to get work done and the skills that are reflected in them. We talk about this where non-engineers are inherently going to become more engineering minded, even if they're not literally writing code. But since these computers are very literal in understanding, walking through these conversations, you need to be almost like an architect, right? Or a way maybe from a non-engineering perspective would be like you're like a product manager. And because you're taking this higher level of abstraction when thinking about these things, the underlying tools are changing, not just because the acceleration of this stuff is happening. And what's interesting is not just it's getting better, the rate at which it's accelerating is increasing. That you don't want to get too invested into this is my exact architecture, because very likely in a couple of months, it's going to be entirely transformed by a new thing, right? But the encouragement to tinker comes from a place of this is a whole new domain space of being able to have a conversation or being able to curate lines of thought. Basically, what you're doing, you're creating a skill file or an agent. You're like, this is the world in which you live in. That is a skill in of itself. And as a general tip for people at home, the most important skill, Claude open sources, because they're just markdown files, right? This isn't code. They have a list of all of these different skills. Anthropic specifically has the skill building skill. So a meta skill. This is how you actually build skills. And that's the one I would start encouraging people to. And you can start having you can
load we get that name again? It's Anthropic's Claude. Which version of Claude?
So any version, right? So these markdown files are just blocks of text. So it's not like Opus versus Sonnet 4.5 versus 4.6, just the skill file. And this is like the idea of, is it more important to have an ability or to learn to make new abilities? And this is in the Anthropic GitHub page. You can call it like it. So Anthropic is the company that runs the Claude models. The skill building skill is what it's called. And you can find it pretty quickly online. It's on GitHub. But it's just a quick text file. You could just click, pull down, load it into a skill on your computer. And that's a great place to start because you're going to have decent guardrails on what it takes to build a skill. And then the reason why you want to tinker too is you want to understand, I was way too specific here. I was way too general there. I should have added A, B, and C pieces to it. And that's the part of tinkering I think should be encouraged. understanding that we're moving, we're changing the domain rather than having different people. You have different text files that are able to start, and this all goes back to context. You're just learning how to manage context. And this is an important thing for, you get to a point in these conversations where there's something called compacting. So let's say there's so you've maybe heard the term token. My 2-sentence summary of that is that what you do with words for these models is you actually transcribe them into numbers, which is called vector. You take a word and you make a vector out of it. And what you do over sentences, all of these words turn into numbers. They get put into the model because it's a mathematical transformation. And on the other side, you get numbers, and they convert those numbers back into words, right? So that's kind of like the magical sleight of hand here. Why are words doing all of these complicated things? It's because it's all math under the hood. And where this goes to for the tinkering and the skills is what you're doing. And when you get to a compaction point of 1 million tokens, which is more than 1 million words, but let's just, for the sake of conversation, say it's that. The model says, I can't do more. You've hit my limit. Let's make this smaller, and it'll go back and make a summary, right? So this turns into memory management. And it'll make an attempt to summarize, but maybe you have strong opinions on what should be maintained, right? So these are like the things you start iterating and thinking about over time. And creating tasks into small bite-sized tasks is a great way of managing context. And so loading your entire code base or every single document you've ever written in your company into one thing is not going to meaningfully actually do that. Because if you get too much, this is one last thing of, it's called like a vector database or retrieval augmented generation, where I have my folder of all of my documents and I ask a question and I'll go look at the folder and be like, oh, this one, they'll look at the title, be like, this may be similar, and it'll pull the whole thing and go back and forth. It gets to a point where everything kind of clusters together and it's all noise. So your own curation of how you think about organizing data, which is funny because it's an engineering principle of like how you organize and kind of break things off, that becomes the important skill. Your data curation, your organization of how you group data, and then also learning how to build these skills. Or like those are skills that are going to be across time still important because these models have fundamental mathematical constraints.
By playing in those, it made me really start to understand a new area of management requirements, I guess, in the future. Would it be fair to say I know you just said what a token is, right?
Sure.
So I know it's not literal, but is it fair to say that tokens are more or less energy or money? I mean, the more tokens your employee uses, the more money.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So just at that level.
That's the gas pump. When you you go to top off, that you're paying by the token.
Right. So currently, let's say a non-technical employee of a company will have very little spending, right? They might have a corporate card where they can cover certain expenses. They might travel. They might pay some vendors for some things. But they themselves, if you're talking a corporate worker, office worker, is not generating a bunch of spend. Suddenly, your team could be generating huge amounts of spend doing work. But how does a new manager start to manage their budget? So I think what's going to happen this year and next year is across the world, suddenly the companies who allow their employees to actually use their computers to do these things, suddenly companies everywhere, managers everywhere are going to find that they blew their budget, right? You could have a team of 10 people that suddenly has generated $1 million of spend over the course of a year. That's an actual possibility. Businesses can't sustain an unexpected $1 million of spend. And then it might not have achieved anything, especially in the next 2 years where people are iteratively learning and trying to build things and it goes nowhere. It doesn't end up being used. And all that spend did not accomplish the business purposes of growth or advancement.
There's just two brief points. One, at the moment, most people are using either a subscription plan. Either it's Claude Code, they pay anywhere between $20 and $200 a month, or they're using a version of that for OpenAI and ChatGPT. Those are being subsidized at the moment, 95 cents on the dollar. So
people are already complaining about the cost.
and or if they reduce the limits, well, you're only going to give me $4,000 of compute for my $200 buy, and people are like, I'm never using Anthropic again. I'm going to go to ChatGPT because they let me take my $200 and spend $5,000 of compute, and you guys are only letting me spend $4,000 of compute.
Yeah,
right.
Someday the subsidies will go away, and then what I'm describing will be even more. Even in the subsidized world, companies are going to get surprise bills. Or unforecasted bills when the subsidies reduce and eventually go away, and people are actually paying their way.
Well, in the video I watched last night, it was Peter Diamandis. Is that his name?
I'm not familiar.
Yeah. So he had a sort of bit of a panel discussion on his podcast, and one of the guys said, "Yeah, I could let one of these agents go overnight. You come back in the morning, you don't know how much it's going to spend unless you put hard limits on it,
Right.
And so it could go off on it, all sorts of sort of wild goose chase, and you don't know what it's going to come back
Well, this
with.
is the other thing too, to Becca's point about like, at the moment, these tools are incredibly productive.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to be seduced by the illusion of productivity. The idea that you can have you can wake up, answer a couple of emails, have an idea, and then by dinner time, something's built, right? And you're like, wow, this would have taken weeks to get to this point. And then I think it's really important to have that kind of freedom to iterate, prototype, think about things. On the engineering side, for a pure proof of concept, I'll code something up in an afternoon, and then I'll realize, oh, I actually missed like 5 different things in this product spec. And that gives me more information for when it's time to actually build things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so easy to be seduced and be like, well, look at all of the work I'm doing. Like, look at how many documents I've made, right? And somewhat like a general principle in data science is like garbage in, garbage out. So like if you're just casually like doing a quick proof of concept, it can be productive and interesting, but it may not be the actual end piece. And to your point, like unless you set hard limits on these things, and that's like when you get to this agent model in general, you're very quickly going to hit your usage limits if you're doing generalized like go explore overnight and do things tasks, which means you have to go to what's per token rather than having this like subscription based thing where you get a certain amount of usage and whatever. You need to actually use the API. And if you're using the API, that's truly like a gas pump, and you're paying twice. You're paying for when I send you data, and then when the model responds. Those each are input and output, and those each have their own cost to them. And that's just its own reasonable thing to manage. And then that turns into a skill of maybe you start discerning. When people talk about ChatGPT or Claude, there's Sonnet, Opus, and Haiku. Opus is like the best model. It's more expensive. And then Haiku is the cheapest model, and it runs faster, right? And then you start realizing, like, do I really need to use Claude Opus to ask about the best coffee shop in my neighborhood? Is that really requiring the most juice, right? And then this also is a way you can break out agents, is you can actually say that
Tell it to select the model?
Well, you can just code saying that whenever I talk to you, I want you specifically to use the lowest quality model. And then on the GPT 5.4 side, like the latest model there's different thinking levels. And this is interesting, the way the models are increasing their thinking. And this was a really big thing that around the time you were getting back that was really like stabilizing, is thinking mode is not like the model is just a mathematical formula, if you want to call it that. It's not like it turns on an extra brain. What it does is if you ask a question, it will have a side dialogue with itself and recursively think on it. And they're charging you for that usage. Like that's all usage. But the iterative process, it's actually modeling like an inner dialogue of asking your question, thinking about it before you go. And the way that gets emulated in this code is it'll talk to itself for a while to think about what the best answer is. And you can set different levels of thinking. Those inherently don't cost more or less, but if you're taking the higher think mode or the extra high think mode, that will just inherently be more costful because it's taking more time. And a very simple example of how I do this is when I'm architecting a project and an idea, I use the ultra high think mode because that's the time to be really expansive and think about the opportunities of things. And then it'll come out with a playbook, and then I can pull down since that high think mode, the output is this like very structured product document. I can then tone down the level of thinking to then just go execute the specific detailed tasks that are at hand.
I think in the future then, I don't mean in the next 2 years, I mean the next 5 and more years. I think part of being a good worker is that you will inherently learn how these models work, and you will start to design your own work to be efficient. That will be partly forced upon you by your employer. to manage costs and your own time, not waste time, and or waste server time if it's happening locally. But as a user, this one will not be that hard because users will want to do it. Because think of it like I think of it like using a slow phone or a slow computer that needs an upgrade. Is you can't change the phone, right? But you will change your own usage of it to meet the internet speed that's provided to you. So you will or you won't do certain things based on the amount of time it takes you. So if you build, let's say, if you don't use an agent model, and so every single time it's doing anything, it's searching this giant context window and taking a long time, that's going to be so annoying. We're going to be wanting instantaneous reaction, just like we demand from a browser window. And so I think over time, people will learn to use agents and sub-agents and skills so it's super efficient. So that way, when they're working or doing their personal life, it's closer to instantaneous. So I think that kind of stuff, some stuff will happen naturally, and some stuff will be forced upon you by your employer as a cost or efficiency or other HR control related things.
I want to explore some, tangible ways that people can use AI now. And I want to break this down between simplified tasks and perhaps some more complex tasks, both technical and non-technical, because a lot of the discussions I had, for the sake of understanding, kind of like a generalized conceptual level. People watching this at home are thinking, yeah, but how can I actually use this when I'm seated at my cubicle? Yeah. What work can it actually do?
I think that's genuinely an exercise in changing your perspective on how to evaluate problems. And the reason why I say that, like, it's entirely, it's an entirely, here's a very just, like as a basic example, I was talking to someone who was asking me how to use these tools, and they're like, well, I don't do. I'm like, well, what is it that you work on? That's a repetitive task. And they said it, and I was like, okay, then go do it. And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, explain your repetitive task, have a conversation with it, and ask it, how can you help me automate this? That's like the ultimate, just like directly. And this is where like people are used to with code and software, like you have to go to school and you have to like read a bunch of textbooks, and then you have to like get a code editor out, and then you have to think about it, you have to design it. All of that is gone in general principle, especially for someone who's not technical and is looking to just go from 0 to 1 and start using this stuff. Having the conversation and just doing your own inventory audit and think about where you're spending the hours of your day, and just start having conversations. And it's an iterative process. And this is why I make the point about tinkering is important. You want to start flexing that muscle and thinking about how to interface with this new technology. And that's where you can go in general.
I can tell you where I started. My first one.
Okay.
My first one is I hate email. I'm terrible at email. I had a friend, an exec at Starbucks, who said when he came back from vacation, he took all like 470 emails and he hit delete. And he's like, just because somebody sends me an email doesn't mean they deserve or like they automatically get my time. Like I was gone. If it's important, they'll email me again. I was like mind blown, right? But I wish I could take that attitude towards email, but that's how much I'm bad at it and I don't like it. And so I was just like, I want this problem solved. And some of my problems are there's a certain type of spam that I'm certain you're familiar with that makes it through the spam filter. And they do it obviously in certain ways. It's instantaneously recognizable, where they don't have any links. They spin up a new domain, so it's not a crazy domain like old spam used to be. I wanted those out. I wanted things that I have to delete manually, like a calendar invite that I've already accepted. I want those out because with my ADD brain, those things, they suck my time away. I open up email to do legitimate work, to look for that email from somebody important and respond to it. But right before I get to that, there's these 17 emails that irritate me. And so I end up doing that. I get distracted. Maybe I run out of time and I have to go to a meeting and I never did the email. So I described that I wanted to create an email agent that could help me solve those problems. And so I talked about it, how to do that. And so earlier, remember I said certain models can do things to your machine, certain models or extensions can do things to your browser. And so I started experimenting with those. I ended up using both Claude and Perplexity Comet browser. Specifically, I've used them both, and they are going through Google web apps, web scripts, script. And so it is code, but it's doing it into Google's kind of platform that they already had in place.
It's important for compliance that you're running this logic. Like you talk to an AI agent and it gave you an output that you're now just running within our enterprise account. Like it's not like Anthropic's reading every email that's coming in.
Right. And so it was just to help me create this email filter. So I talked to it for a bit and I said, okay, run it. Let's see how it does. And it said, okay, I ran it. I was like, well, I need to know how you did. So, okay, now when you run the email, send me a daily email recapping what folders you cleaned out. I had 8 or 10 different things I wanted it to do in terms of filtering and cleaning things out that were a little more advanced than the native filtering skills. And so now then the next thing was I got a daily email and it listed everything that it had deleted or moved to spam. And if I see something it did poorly, I could go retrieve it out of the spam folder and save it because it was maybe a bill or something like that. And then every, let's say, 4 or 5 days, my email would irritate me again, and I could tell that my email assistant was not doing well. And so then when I found time, I would open up that kind of conversation. I'd be like, the email filter still sucks. It's still not doing the spam. It is terrible. There's a reason that stuff makes it through the spam filter, even though we can perceive it. Apparently, it's very, very hard. So every maybe 5 days, I would put in a few more requests, or I would show it a screenshot of something and be like, this is happening. Why is this happening? And it would improve it to the point that I have like a moderately useful email assistant. And then I would say the most advanced one I've done was done for playing, at least most advanced in terms of like my thought process and getting it going, is actually just one that is a get me out of the door when I'm traveling, packing to go to the airport skill, I guess, where I tell it what I need to do before I leave. And now it's learned how long each task type takes. And
So it keeps you focused.
It will more or less estimate my amount of time based on what I have going on, and it will remind me currently by sending me a text message. But what I want to do when I get home is a final step where I want to actually connect it to the Amazon Alexa verbal thing, which is the world's stupidest model, by the way. It is an LLM now. So you can have conversations with it, but it's a really bad one. But I want to next take my get out the door tool, hook it up to the Alexa, so then I have audible call outs. So those are the types of things I did just to play, to learn.
Just a very concise one for most people who use, like many people at their desk jobs use Excel. If there's regular Excel tasks that you're doing all the time, have a conversation, drop it in there. It could work well with ChatGPT. If you want to if there's something you're always doing to a spreadsheet, you can use Claude Code or Cowork, and it'll make a script that'll automate that, or to summarize, right? If you have very large, complicated documents, give me the ability to do quick summary calls. Like that's where it excels really well too. Or if you work with a lot of large documents, being able to summarize a large.
Do you use it to learn much?
Learn with what?
Well, an example was I needed to write an email back to Lloyd's of London, our contact at Lloyd's of London, and I needed to make an argument based on insurance math and actuarial data that I didn't natively understand. And so the goal is just help me craft an email response. But I didn't want to just send an AI response. I wanted to be able to make this argument. And so I actually took 4 hours in all with the ultimate goal of just an email response. And I had it more or less teach me actuary math,
Yes,
which was amazing. Like I could have never written that email. I could have never written that email.
I had a similar experience. There was something technical. I wonder if it was math or chemistry or something that in high school I had. I did a lot of things wrong in high school, but I just had a question and I asked it, and it explained it in a way that I've never heard anyone explain it to me before. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
I wonder if I can go back and co-learn with one of these models, all the topics that I struggled with in class.
Sure.
Because, I mean, as much as I wasn't a conventional sort of learner, I'd always get these weird questions pop in my mind, and I'd treat them as roadblocks, because unless it was answered, I couldn't just focus on the rest of the class, because I'd be so fixated on, but what about that?
Right.
And of course, you can't interrupt the class every 15 minutes with a question.
One, absolutely. Like that's a perfect example. A tangential example is homeschool my kids, and my wife makes homeschool worksheets, whatever they look on, and whatever they're interested in that day, has a quick conversation, prints out a worksheet, boom. Now we have like custom tailored learning. And for general learning, I use that all the time, and kind of checking my assumptions, digging in deeper, trying to like read up on things for sure. And this is where people have different relationships with AI and how they use it. I'm very productivity and work focused, or knowledge, or just general like information gathering, but some people use it for a therapist, right? Having a conversation, right? Like that, and that's never been something I've personally used it for.
Careful.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I've never personally used it as that.
Yeah.
But that's where I think learning and exploration in general, and I think it's also interesting too, is like even on personal side, having like if you were to use that, you could have it look at patterns over time, devil's advocate your own positions, being able to value other people's perspective and thinking about things and how to communicate, whether it's a work email or someone that's in your life. Like these are all things that you can use I use it as like a recursive, just like I have a thesis, challenge it, like modify it, iterate, move forward.
If people want to start to understand the concept of Claude Code, I really recommend they start to, well, not just specifically Claude, by the way, like coding and the future. Rob once said to me back when he was getting really excited, but before the tooling had developed and I saw it, he's like, no, everybody is going to code. And I said at the time, my response is, no, they're not. That's not how, like I've managed too many people and just to know, no, they're not. No, they're not. And he was like, yes, they are. And the thing is we're both entirely correct, which is pleasant for a co-founder relationship. Well, yeah, I mean, Chris's thing. Yeah, that's where I'm headed. But yeah, we're both absolutely correct, because when I talk about my email, that is building, that's coding. I didn't just talk to it and have a conversation. I talked to it and it built something for me. Not, right? It actually built something for me. And so in that way, Rob is entirely correct. Everybody is going to code. Everybody is going to build, I would say. And when I'm saying no, they won't, what I mean is no, they won't. They will use a wrapper and they will interact with it in a normie way, and it will do the coding for you. Now, a fun anecdote that like we're excited to talk about is actually kind of an in-between that I think is an opportunity for people who have the interest in going this way. And it is this in-between state where you're not, say, an engineer of today. You're not a coder of today, but you're much more advanced than, say, your average office worker. And so Chris on our team is our head of ops. He is very technically oriented and interested, and the things I was using Google Script for, using AI. So AI was using Google Script on my behalf. He was already the type that was experimenting with that on himself, and it was just very laborious, right? Because he was kind of figuring it out as he went. But somebody with that inclination saw a problem, which is we have one of our back-end systems is It's a small piece of software, meaning a small company. And, like any kind of back office software, there's parts of it. Maybe there's a bunch of different modules to serve different clients or different businesses that license the software. You use parts of it, you don't use parts of it. And so what he decided is like, this part of my job is very frictiony, and I know that we pay a lot of money for the software. So I am going to rebuild it. And so he and I had a conversation, and I was talking about kind of my ahas about how people are going to use these tools. And he took that as kind of go ahead to start experimenting. And I talked to him on a Thursday. Apparently on a Friday, he started. And by Monday, he showed me that he had rebuilt, and we'll tell you what we meant by that, but rebuilt this piece of software in entirety. And in terms of looking at it on the screen and how it appeared, it worked. It pretty much worked. So if, customer info went in here, all the proper things would happen. It would spit out, our desired information. And so he had created this on the surface, and think of it as a prototype, effectively. And I gave him some feedback on it. I said, well, if, let's say he's the user himself. So if you're inputting stuff that's currently on, these 3 pages, wouldn't it be nicer if they're all on one page? It would be faster, fewer clicks, right? He's like, oh yeah. So then he, just by taking screenshots, right? So he started with screenshots of existing software that he uses, and then he told it what he likes about it and doesn't like about it. He explained how he wants to use it. He spent a lot of effort into context. But in terms of Claude Desktop, I said it's chat, co-work, and code. Chat is chat. Think of it just like GPT. Co-work, when I said at the beginning of our conversation, was a bit of a misnomer that everybody seemed to think it was co-work was the big unlock. Co-work is, think of it for really building deep analysis or specific tasks. I almost never use co-work. Code is this big step farther where, it really will write the code and can go so much farther. When he showed it to Rob, and I'll hand this over to Rob in just a moment. When he showed it to Rob, I think Rob, he can do his own reaction, but I think he was pretty impressed. When we talked about it as, executives or managers over our team, I was very curious his point of view. And he said, look, I mean, on the front end, very impressive. On the back end, very unsecure, not the right languages. Everything's jerry-rigged. And so then I'll pause, but that's ultimately then what starts a conversation here about how do we want to take advantage of these crazy abilities, this insane ability that this guy who's not technical just rebuilt a piece of software that we pay money for, right? And what could it look like in the future when we can overcome the security and the jankiness?
So before you answer, I want to set some context. My personal interest in this question is immense because there is a challenge at the moment that's in my mind, is that there's never been a solo founder entrepreneur who's built $1 billion company on his own. And I think the possibility with the tools that we've got emerging, I don't think we're there yet by the sounds of it, but I want to hear your opinion.
No, I think it's possible, and I'm not the first to say this, it's possible that person's building that company right now.
Right now.
It's very possible. So for this anecdote, of building things, it was funny because I got pulled in when basically Becca's like, oh, I just talked to Chris, he's rebuilding stuff. And I was like, oh, he's building software. In the company, I manage the engineers, and I was like, okay, let's see how this goes. And it was impressive in the sense that...
Tell us what you were impressed by first.
Well, that's what I was going to... Yeah, so from a strictly just the front end and looking at it and just building something you can touch for a prototype. And I made this comment earlier that I really enjoy using these coding tools. And actually, it's funny, for your distribution, I almost entirely only use Claude Code, even for analysis. And only if it's very superficial, quick question, will I use chat. And that's basically, but 95% of my work is with Claude Code or Codex or these the coding level tools. And I'll get to that back in a second. But for what Chris did was so impressive was This is something we would have hired a junior engineer a year ago to work on for a week or two, and
just to get to the prototype.
Just to get to the prototype of what Chris had done. And it looked nice. It was functional code. Like the front end was like, it was real framework. Like there was a library there. There are certain things that I'll get to in a second that are easily addressable. There wasn't a database. There wasn't any security validation of when you talk to a front end website, when you put data in somewhere, you don't want to let any arbitrary blob through. It used an insecure version of TypeScript, like which is just a coding language, right? And in the post-mortem of talking about this was, one, like we were very happy like for Chris to go off and run undo this, even though it's not really like his day job, but like this was a good exercise to start figuring out what the future of work looks like for people that are highly motivated office workers. So as managers, us kind of looking at this as like a post-mortem experience and understanding, okay, this was a fun little experiment, took a couple days. Chris wasn't burning API token credits, right? So this was all within his subscription limit. So as a quick iterative loop of understanding, I want to build something. I'm a motivated office worker. How do I kind of go to that next step? What we did was, talking about it, I realized that there were several things we could do across teams. On the first side, when looking at, building this out, I may have mentioned this earlier, thinking like a product manager. You need to be very disciplined and specific upfront, because it's way easier as these machines are building things to have the good context and the good patterns up front than to say, oh, I made a missed assumption or I forgot something, go bolt this back in.
So what does that mean? Does that mean work on a full product requirement description or product requirement document first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than say, build me, like if it's a photo editing app, build me a photo editing app.
Exactly.
What does that mean?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Well, I was going to say, I think it is important to know going into a test, I guess, or a project, knowing how it is intended to be used. I think doing that in general is not generally necessary if you're building something for yourself. If you're dog fooding something for your own tool, it's not going to go elsewhere. Then as long as you're using your time and resources wisely, it really doesn't need to have that level of review. The question is, if we want to use something as a company, if we want to start building the tools that we need to be successful and do them in-house, what does that look like if it's involving non-technical workers, right? And that's where the PDD, I think, becomes very important. And that's what Rob shared is that's where we need to begin now. That's what we learned here.
Yeah. And so before anything's written, you're going to get way further better returns. And I made this comment earlier about how maybe this is where you'd use your higher quality models, extra thinking time, being very slow and methodical, and just very detailed building out specs. And I think what's important for this is having the engineers aware of it, because if Chris were to build something, he's going to build it and then someone else is going to have to maintain it. And software devs in general, like if at all possible, don't like maintaining other people's code, because if there's issues or problems, they are issues and problems that were created by someone else. And now it's their job to be janitor. Chris gets to have a fun, like 4 or 5 day sabbatical building something and then throws it over the fence. And now my team's like, well, this sucks. Like, and not that like Chris is great to work with, right? It's just like, this is now my problem. Now I have to own all of the technical debt associated with this. I have to own all of the complexities or the misassumptions, and I have to kind of bolt and do these things on later, or maybe even possibly rewrite things, which then just becomes tedious because it's way easier for a developer going from the start, actually building this and methodically building out in a way that makes sense to them that may not be exactly the way a model has generated something.
I was going to say, that
so
sounds
this
like
is
a very real world non-AI problem, but it's exacerbated because you don't have anyone you can go to and say, hey, why did you build it like this?
So when talking about this, like upfront with the software developers, I think it's very like, why I say this is a cross-team functional thing, is that it would also be really helpful for our developers to say, these are the languages that we use. This is how our general system is architected. So it's not like, I'm going to do a database, I'm going to build it for NoSQL, which is a database type where we use Postgres, right? Like it's like one of these things where you want to immediately upfront kind of call these things out. And also like as in going through our code and thinking about, okay, whenever we build a front end website, we do things like form validation. let's talk about how we do form validation up front and maybe even show some patterns of how we use that and give that to someone like Chris. So then when there is a intersection of work streams, it's something that's already following the basic code patterns of things that we already exhibit and do.
Now, that's not the only way a company can or should allow their teams. That was kind of our learning and our decision for how we're going to use this if it's going to be deployed. But think about what else we accomplished there and how else you could choose to use it. So at the beginning of kind of talking about this anecdote, Rob said that he was impressed on the front end because it would have taken a front end dev weeks to kind of mock up this, whereas it took a non-technical person a few days. But what he didn't mention is actually the time to hand over the request to that engineer to start building. So the way we used to, like if I wanted, if it's a back office tool or whatever, if I wanted a certain functionality, generally what I would do is, I've got a big digital whiteboard or an iPad Pro with a pencil, something like that. Usually I would start by drawing my own wireframes. So I'd have here and maybe a rough button here and then arrows and then it goes here. And I would be using words with the devs to be like, and here's what I want this to do and here's what I want that to do. And they're already maybe starting to get frustrated because I'm making requests that they know how difficult or challenging something might be. I don't know. I just want the button here. I just want the button here. And so you might get to a point where you have drawn out approximately what you want, and then you hand it over to that front-end dev, and then you get back something from them, which may or may not match what I envisioned in my head when I made the request of the tech team to start with. Now, even if you don't want to have your team go as far as deploying software, and you need to have that security and infrastructure done properly, what if it's just a very fast way to communicate now? Because he's now built a working prototype that even if they can't use a speck of code from it, he has now communicated more completely than any hand-drawn conversation could have ever communicated. He has built exactly what he wants. And so a company could choose to be like, look, this is already a better PDD than I could have ever received.
So just to
the
flesh that out a
prototype
little bit,
is
when you've
PDD.
got teams like cross-functional teams working with one another, you have the end user will say, I want something like this. Yeah, but, and then, the product manager or the engineering team would be like, but what do you mean? It doesn't make sense to us. Whereas if you can actually show them what you mean. So
this is a really important point. This was the strength of any person within an organization is people who have cross-disciplined understanding. You always to be the bridge, whether it's information or understanding, whatever it is, to be the bridge is a really good place to be in an organization. And one of the best strengths I had when I was a consultant at IBM, working with people, and they'd be like, oh, that would take 2 weeks. And I'm like, can you explain how that takes 2 weeks? And they'd be like, oh, because X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, A, B, and C, right? Whatever the specific mechanics are, the ability to materially collapse inward the knowledge gaps and make the bridge shorter to move faster, but then to also, in running an organization, being able to quickly discern who's working hard and who's being productive is immensely valuable now. That is something that is just very inherently where we have a very small engineering team. We don't have this problem, but at large organizations, Becca, if you're working at Starbucks, you're like, I want to update SAP or whatever it was to do X, Y, and Z. And then you have to go, you have to file a help desk ticket. You have to go do a meeting, right?
Not only would you run into things when you're using external software, I did work on SAP, so let's use it, SAP Ariba. Some people out there are like, oh, ouch, I know your pain.
Yeah.
It might just be a time thing. So I might come in and say, hey, the users of the software, the 10,000 users of the software.
People paying for it.
Yes, they all want a button here because this task takes, I counted 17 clicks, but if you put a button here, it would solve that problem. Sometimes when you're using external software, like SAP or as an Oracle piece of software, sometimes the engineers can do that for you. You have to wait for the dev cycle and wait your turn, but sometimes they can put that button where you request for your company. But many, many times they would say, no, we can't because other clients use this and that is at that level. And so we can't customize it for you. And so it was just like, okay, so these 10,000 people are all spending 9 minutes 6 times a week that they shouldn't need to. And then you do the math and across an organization, like the lack of a button costs, X many minutes and therefore dollars of productivity. And that will be a thing of the past.
Yeah.
And then Rob also mentioned kind of workers and knowing if people are working. That was actually my first aha when I got into using these tools for work versus just playing and using chat and learning. When I actually started using them to make myself more productive and move faster, I immediately saw the change in the workforce. Immediate. People say like entry level is done, certain thing. I don't actually agree with that. I say middle of the bell curve is done. That could be middle of the bell curve intelligence because they're just not smart enough to use these tools to their maximal ability. And even the first to go are going to be mid-curve effort because mid-curve effort has a large element of BS built into it. Mid-curve effort is somebody intelligent-ish or maybe fully intelligent who uses that intelligence to make themselves very efficient. They do their job very quickly, and then they steal the rest of their time. And then they BS about how long tasks take. So I want somebody now who will say, wow, this tool will allow me to get so much more done.
Yeah.
I am going to create these automations. I'm going to take advantage of this. And then when they've collapsed their 40 hours of work into 8 hours of work, they're going to look up and look for more opportunities to contribute. And they're going to continue producing deliverables. When I said the BS was over, what I mean is in the past, when somebody said they're working on it, I can simply ask to see the iteration because, and with my team, for example, we've kind of changed that daily iterations are our new norm because there's nothing that takes more than a day to at least get it to the next level, right? So there's nothing of like, well, do you want me to do this or this? I want you to do both.
Give us an example
both of
that.
those.
We were having this chat the other day, but just to give people an understanding of how much this compresses time, give us an example of something that may have taken 1 or 2 weeks that suddenly it is very reasonable for you to ask for by this afternoon or tomorrow morning.
At least an iteration.
An iteration. We're not looking for perfection, just to drive the conversation further.
Yeah, so maybe in the past, I might have asked somebody on my team to investigate or start doing research on a particular customer vertical because I sense that there's an opportunity there. I don't know much about it. I want to know more about it. But then also I want to figure out where is there like a distro list of this profession? So like, let's say estate attorneys and trust attorneys. And so I want them to go deep on kind of this as a profession, who they serve. And based on that, I want a marketing proposal on how we're going to find and locate these people and go all the way to, some sort of deliverable at the end of it. And if it's starting from something that they know nothing about, I would say in the old world, I would have expected it to be about a 10-hour task. And I understand with meetings and emails and other things, to ask a 10-hour task of somebody, I'm going to generally give them about a week to fit that 10 hours into their other work. Mm-hmm. Now I expect a version tomorrow. Just an iteration.
Yeah.
And if somebody does BS you, and I'll give it to you, then if somebody does BS you, not that I've had to do this, but I now know what I would do, especially if I was in a corporate environment where I couldn't just, I literally could be like, if somebody kind of explains why something's taking a long time, and I don't believe them, literally I could be like, oh, just so I understand your thought process and how you approach the problem, why don't you just send me a markdown file of your actual conversation history with the model, just so I can see how if they didn't do it, it's not there to show.
I want to see how you're thinking
Right?
and what the model's output is.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that, and the way I would even think about this further is that whenever you're doing work in general, there is the moment of I need to do X, Y, and Z, doing those things, taking a half step back, reflecting on it, and just as an iterative, like with any task that you're doing, whether it's a spreadsheet, a document, a PowerPoint, getting ready for a pitch, whatever it is, research, organizing things, all of these things like just have this little loop. And what this does is instantly collapses the loop. And what's so exciting about highly motivated workers is we're collapsing all of the work of the tedious part of getting the things on page and going back to using your brain. It's like, all right, I'm gonna use my brain, I'm gonna use my brain, I'm gonna use my brain, right? And there's certain people who are just highly motivated. And this is not in the bell curve of like intelligence. I think it's just strictly motivation. I think I would take a 105 IQ person who is highly motivated over a 140 IQ lazy person any day of the week when it comes to using these tools. And there's a fundamental model just in life in general. So you can view words as spells. You're having a conversation and you're either trying to persuade or you're trying to convey or you're trying to do something, right? And maybe in an old work culture, people who would be able to ascend corporate hierarchy structures because they were really good spellcasters. They knew how to posture things and they knew how to, phrase things. And then when it came to work, you had all of these meticulous details of why your work was so involved and important. Yeah. And that's all just gone. Like it's just completely obliterated. Like this is going from a swords to muskets kind of just like jump, right? And the people that are highly motivated are able to execute better. And additionally, when it comes to like, I'm like expecting iterations, it's not just like, this is something that's been very apparent for code for a long time, where if someone's like, oh, I worked on it, here's my update. And you look at it and you're like, okay, you literally just asked a coded question. I'm looking at the code changes. You did not look at this. You just said, make an update looking at X, Y, and Z. And what you actually are looking for in these iterations is not just, I had a conversation and the computer did my work for me and here's what the computer did for me. It is the additional loop of, okay, I'm going to use my judgment now. I have an output. And now I want to think very critically about what this output is doing and maybe do that 2 or 3 times, look at it one more time, and then hand it over, right? And this is where I think most people in the workforce, we're such a small company, it's not relevant to us because it's very tight knit and we're all kind of like sprinting along. But in the larger workforce, there are a lot of people who are like, someone wants me to make a report, I make the report. Okay, and here's my report. And they are totally surrendering their autonomy, their own intellectual brain. Like they are going into autopilot. And those are the people that are very quickly, with the compounding ability of these tools, that it's going to further differentiate. Everyone gets more productivity, but the people that are going to leverage this and on top of it and compound on top of it are going to get way further ahead than someone who's not.
The ones who don't will get fired. I mean, transparently,
so
right? Like they really will, because
well, this is a funny thing.
Go ahead.
Well,
go ahead.
just very quickly, this is a funny thing because like you saw maybe with Cash App Block, like they laid off a bunch of people. So 40% in the stock rose. And one, I think in general, there was a massive overhiring during COVID and salary inflation. This was a great way to clean it up. You see these massive layoffs and it just very quickly became like, oh, these are the people who are just not even trying, right? Like it very quickly you can discern out and understand. And that's a general statement. Like I'm not saying that every single individual person, and there's always office politics and mechanics and details of things, but
luck.
And luck. Yeah. Like especially at a large org like that, like there are some
good
arbitrary
people get
things.
Like
it's not a conclusive thing. The people who are highly motivated are going to be okay. But when you're thinking about this and these like large layoffs, I think it's just very quickly going to compound. I think people at the moment are using, because AI is here, we had to do layoffs because we have increase in productivity. And I just think that it's less of that and more of AI very clearly is starting to show who your highest performers are. And it's not that, it's another way of saying it, but like AI, like taking jobs, but it's not just like because the computers are automating anything. They're quickly seeing these are our high performers. These are the ones that are really leveraging these tools and that we're able to get a large amount of output with less. And this is a general principle, like Mark Andreessen or someone else, with any organization, the square root of the number of employees is half of the work. So if you have 100 employees, 10 do half the work. And if you have 150, 12 are doing half the work. And I think just AI is just very quickly showing that like it accelerates that principle in general because they're the ones that are highly motivated.
I did the math on that last night actually with Starbucks, and because I had always said it was Pareto, 20% of people do 80% of the work. There will be little bumps along the way of learning. I'd like to think I'm a top performer. I had more or less two embarrassing things, like 3 days apart, where I accidentally shipped out slop externally and had to, in neither case did it create any negative repercussions, but it was embarrassing because usually I wouldn't typically send out mistakes. But what I quickly learned with my team as well, because in one of those two cases also, like, my team had also checked it, and I believe they did. I believe they put in the time in their old way of checking things. So you think of it like an Excel form if you built it. So let's say you built a little calculator that does whatever you were trying to do. If I built that, I'm the one that typed in the formulas. When I make a change, or if I type in a number and I see everything else change, I know what's happening because I'm the one that built it, and I actually understand. And so when I'm checking my work, if I built it, I can spot check. So I can see, like, I'll check cell C11 and F22, and if those are correct, I'm reasonably sure the document is correct, and I can send it out. Same thing in words. Like, if I'm the one that wrote something and I'm just kind of spell checking and do grammar stuff, and I do very little time editing, most of the time in creation, I was taking that way of working into this new world, and I did some spot checking on an Excel, and the cells were correct, and I sent it out only to figure out after the fact that, like, there were totally made up numbers on it. Like, I'd sent out absolutely just incorrect information. And then I did a similar thing on a written document where it had hallucinated a different custody model than ours. And because I didn't go back and read every page, reread every page, it sent out this garbage. So now I know that creation is not the time-consuming thing. Editing and judgment, like Rob mentioned, is the time-consuming thing. And that's what I'm paying people for. If I'm going to pay anybody 6 figures ever again, it's for the use of their judgment and their mind to interact with these things. It's not for tasks ever again.
Mm-hmm. That's the big step function change, for sure. And that's
bottom of the bell curve. I might still employ people if we have tasks that somehow are not automatable.
Yeah.
But those mid-effort people are gone forever.
And that's just on the coding side, it's turning more to code review, not actually writing the code. It's, okay, you've proposed a change. Let me now look at a pull request, which is like the changing of the code. And let me look through that and understand it, ask it questions, and trying to avoid the Ouroboros of the snake eating its own tail of, well, I have an AI agent that reviews the code before I deploy. I mean, for the work we do specifically with Bitcoin custody, I'm very happy that we've built all of this before the big AI boom happened. And I say that strictly because, like, seeing people like Vibe code a quick wallet for a fun project is fine. But with Bitcoin money, the code is money, like, and the money is the code. So, like, there really isn't a margin of error for any of that. And I feel very good about that. And one of the first things I did when these tools started coming out was I started red teaming. Like, to red team is like to try and attack your own infrastructure.
Oh, okay.
And felt very good getting to that. I was like, oh, wait, this is great. I was like, oh, let me check out, like, the ledger hardware. Let me check out the cold card. Like, I started, like, looking at things and poking around and felt pretty good from, like, this initial assessment of things. That's not sure how much of this is hype and marketing. The latest models that are going to be coming out end of April are so good at the moment, actually, at cybersecurity, where they're finding bugs in the Linux kernel. They're finding bugs in the Chrome browser and Firefox, like, very serious bugs. And they're trying to early, like, distribute to cybersecurity teams before, like, it gets to the general public.
Do you think in terms of, so I would say cybersecurity has always been an arms race, right? So hackers, coming in, and hackers are increasing their abilities, and defenders are increasing their. So this goes up and up, right? Mm-hmm. I have to imagine that these tools simply exacerbate that, or does this ever get so resilient that somehow, like, hacking is a thing of the past, or the opposite, and it's just, like, indefensible? Or is it just the same that we're in today, but
it's
faster?
Mutually, everyone just has the same quality of arms now. So just the complexity of the domain in general, just, like, going from swords to guns to going to missiles and nukes. Just
got it. So now you're walking away 10 paces, turning around, and then like shooting a ballistic missile at each other instead of
right. And so it's just constantly going back and forth with all that. Like, I don't think it goes away fundamentally.
Have you tried the Replit platform?
Briefly, a little bit.
Give me your thoughts on that, because I've used that.
I think it has a really good non-engineering experience for being able to do that. I think it's great for prototyping. It'll also help you build out like your architecture for your database and kind of like go through these things and having conversations. I saw the latest Replit announcement, which was really cool, where they basically have your code base and what you're building also live with like your marketing documentation, and having them kind of recursively, like it kind of, that memory management and context is really well handled. And it just very cleanly for someone to be able to just click a button and deploy code too. So all of the infrastructure complexities are just totally abstracted away. So I think it's a very powerful tool. That's like cool. Like starting with, we don't build on it. Like we own our own infrastructure. We go through all of these different pieces. Like,
got an engineering team.
I have an engineering team. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. An engineering team, and also have crossed the threshold of skill domain where even if I wanted to have agents write the code and do that, I would have them help me build my own infrastructure rather than using something that's entirely self-hosted.
Yeah.
That is something that's within my knowledge and context that I personally have, that I could use AI tools. And that's the funny thing, right? You and I, this is actually just as a comment, a beautiful thing about these AI models is they're massively democratized. There isn't like a secret cabal short of the people who work at these companies. It's not like let's pick it like Amazon has access to like the super duper secret model, and you and I have like a pleb model.
Yeah.
Like
Everyone has access to the best.
Everyone has access to the best, right? And that's just like an interesting democratizing thing. But I can use that to build cloud infrastructure, but since that's not your area of domain, you're able to do that. But there are probably many things that you have unique domain expertise on that I do not, that you'd be able to way further accelerate and use it for, production of a podcast or like 1,000 other things, right? And that's just like the differentiation. Everyone's going to be even more specialized.
Rob's expertise is really important. And I think earlier I said I will use Claude Code. And the reason for that, or the reason is that I have already run into limitations of letting it think for me.
Oh yeah.
That because I don't have the domain expertise, I cannot yet, or at least really quickly anyway, redirect it to do things better, more efficiently. So for example, I had a series of Google Drive folders that had like 50 PDFs in them. And I wanted to have it go into these folders. I had a list of documents. I wanted to go into these like 6 folders and download each of them onto my desktop into its own folder. That was the task. And it spent like all day doing this. And what it was doing was taking like a screenshot of my list. And then like based on that screenshot, it was doing this, and then it was opening each folder and comparing things to things. And I would leave my computer and come back, and like 4 hours later, I see what it's been doing. And I'm like, no, you idiot. Like, why would you do it like that? That's so dumb. And right now, all I kind of know is that Rob, if he was the one doing this, he would have said something along the lines of, I'm just going to write a script that's going to like da-da-da-da-da. And he would write it, and because he knows the best way to instruct a computer to do that. I don't know the best way. And so all I can do is gradually learn over the next 6 to 18 months by watching it do stupid things.
This is why it's important to tinker. This is exactly.
You must tinker. I tell my friends, look at how I like it. The important
thing is just pushing your domains and realize that's not efficient, and tinkering.
And this is what I have spent the last 6 weeks having coffee and lunch with all my friends and my family and my sister, who are all still in corporate America, where I am urging them to tinker. You must do this. All these things we've been talking about today, if you don't want to get laid off in the next 5 years, you must. I care about you so much. I care about you. You must tinker, because if you haven't, and all my friends at this point in my career are senior managers through executives, right? If you as a leader are not thinking about the second order effects of these things, or starting to, or you can't even picture because you've never had these thoughts in your head yet because you haven't tinkered, you are not doing yourself a favor. For sure.
A really funny, just like mirror image of that exact anecdote is, so my wife works in biochemistry at a publicly traded company. I went into like their like quarterly earnings, and I started just like poking around, and I threw it all in there. And I was trying to show her like how important this is as she's getting back to work. And I just started asking questions about the research, and have you thought about X, Y, and Z? And she's looked at me, she's like, okay, like, did you listen to a podcast? I'm like, where do you get? And I was like, no, I just did it. And she's like, wait, and it was just one of these like funny inflections where she's like, oh, wait a second, like this general, this democratizing factor of knowledge in general that's happening right now is something that many people aren't appreciating unless they're tinkering. And that's what you want to tinker. Like, you need to be able to tinker and understand, like, because the way you describe your problem, like, I would have used the Google Drive API and I would have made a very simple thing and just talk about it like a computer system would. And that's why everyone's turning more into writing code. It's that you're a product manager, and the product managers understand maybe not the lines of code, but they understand the connectors and the tools to speak in a language that can go to the engineers to do that. And now your engineer is a chatbot, so, right? So you and I could do a race of like, how do you want to do this? And since I understand the general architecture, but like the closing the gap of understanding general architecture, like you easily could have asked me like, how would you think about this problem? I would have been like, boom, boom, boom. And then you would have been done.
Totally.
A 30 to 90 second conversation would have transferred sufficient knowledge for her for in perpetuity, whenever interacting with Google Drive, you would have known how exactly.
And every now and then I'll ask him, but sometimes I'm actually purposely not, because it's the same thing I actually push my team to do, which is they're like, well, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to do this, or I don't want it to like, that's intimidating to me. And we keep being like, ask it how to do it. Let it tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to kind of live that to a certain extent, even when I can see that this is happening in a stupid way and I'm not figuring it out yet. I am trying to learn how to communicate with it, to wrestle from it what I need and do some of that learning. I would recommend actually getting the tips and tricks for most people, because why waste a bunch of effort and time?
I think as a manager, it's important to learn those skills. I mean, I've had funny things where I'll have a bug in software. I'm like, hey, can you help me fix it? And what it'll do is it'll just remove the code.
Yeah.
Bugs fixed.
So it's
I removed the code. Like I just removed the code. Isn't that better? Like I fixed it now. No more. Our test suite has no more errors because you just remove the code, or it'll remove the test. Yeah. You know, like
can't fail a test. You don't run.
Right. So like you have to kind of like always be on check.
That's the old Soviet saying: you have man, you have a problem. You have no man, no problem.
That's right. That's right.
True.
Now we've spoken a lot about how people can position themselves as employees.
Sure.
So that they can get more out of their work and make themselves more valuable in an environment where, a lot of people are going to come under pressure.
Yes.
As an entrepreneur, how do I qualify someone as having potential to work well with AI or not?
So far for me, it's not very complicated. It's looking for top performers in attitude and intelligence. I don't agree as much as Rob's kind of extreme statement, which may have been for a fact that he would take a 105 IQ with good effort. 105 is pretty dull. But I would take
it's above average.
Yeah.
Definitionally.
Yeah. 105 is pretty dull, but I would take 120 in good effort over 140 in lazy. So honestly, I'm just looking for people. If I were hiring today,
I'm fighting for my life here.
If I were hiring literally today,
yeah,
I would certainly get into this conversation about using the tools. How are you using it today? How do you think about it? Give me some examples of things that you've done.
Yeah.
And if their answer is something along the lines of, well, I've been using chat and I've been using it more and more, and I did some really good research or spreadsheet once. I did that. That was really useful. But it becomes evident that they have not used it beyond a better Google.
That's
because
pretty
it's
much everybody, though.
But it's so new, right?
Yeah.
So it's so new that maybe it's fine that as a non-technical person, maybe you haven't. But when I press into that and I start talking about this, if they're getting excited and you see their eyes opening up and like, oh, wow, like that is true. And like you see these things, that means a lot, versus a lot of people have this initial reaction that is like, especially non-technical people, is I don't want to learn to code. I don't want to gain that knowledge because it's boring to me. If I had wanted to do that, I would have become an engineer to start with. And if their initial reaction is to say no, they're probably going to have a very rough 5 years, because all we're going to be is change. more and more efficient. And the only people who are successful who see that and are like, oh, cool. Oh my God, I want to try that. Like, oh, cool. Oh my God. Oh, so interesting. Like, and those are the people who are going to use their intellectual curiosity, even if they have not had a chance to yet. That's what I'm looking for, is the spark, I think. And not much more than that, because the tools are going to enable an entry-level person with intelligence and a great attitude. They're not going to have the same judgment in using the tools as a experienced career professional who has lots of examples and personal anecdotes to bring in. But if they're smart and have good judgment with the tools, suddenly they can be on the same level. Let's say I'm talking about a 22-year-old university hire. I think a good 22-year-old university hire will be performing at the same as somebody with 10 years experience because of the tools, I think.
We can't finish this podcast without talking about Bitcoin and AI.
I was about to wonder if we're going to go to the data center conversation.
So where do you want to pick this up? Because the obvious one is transactions, right? And so the assumption has been within, well, for me, perhaps you have a different place to start. But for me would be the obvious place, the combination of AI and Bitcoin would be transactions.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
So like agents being empowered to go off and do.
Got it. A couple random thoughts. Just as a little bit of background. These data center. I thought we'll talk about Bitcoin as money first, because my mind went immediately to data centers. I think fundamentally, I'm not a big fan of these I know I love BPI, but they did this study that we surveyed a bunch of models and they look using Bitcoin as money. And ultimately, these things are tools that are pointed in a direction, and they are going to use whatever their system directs them to do. I do think a natively digital money makes the most sense for these things to be able to do. Instantaneous settlement, when you use the token and it's gone and the work is gone, the money has to live somewhere. These things are critically important for transaction stuff. I think it removes much of the friction around Bitcoin, because you no longer have to be a Bitcoin developer and deploy a server that running a Lightning node, and all of these things, all of those intermediary complexities start collapsing inward. Bitcoin for transactions in a machine-to-machine context, I think makes a lot of sense. I think also most people haven't put thought into what good security looks like for managing that. And you don't want to be in a position where you have some random code that spins up that's running on a server and you're not a software dev, all of a sudden is managing large flow, right? So I think custody comes back to be important, whether it's within a Lightning channel or you're using ARC or state chain, stable coins for dollars. I think all of this stuff, just Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, can very easily start collapsing because a lot of the technical barrier starts dissolving. You no longer have to be a dedicated Lightning engineer to be able to figure out how am I going to send and receive payments.
Won't we immediately start hearing stories of, for example, agents that more or less drain another agent's Bitcoin wallet and things like that, you've given it kind of permission to charge and more or less create an invoice. Let's say that's happening behind the scenes. So you've given permission to agents on both sides to both create an invoice and then another agent to effectively pay a Lightning invoice, say. But that will go badly for some people. There will be accidents where suddenly, they're creating too many invoices and the other agent is just paying them, no problem.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin is some people will probably get rich and some people will probably get poor accidentally because of this dynamic.
Yeah.
So I think we'll hear things about that.
For sure. And I think it's interesting too, because Bitcoin as money is an abstract concept. Right. You when people start getting into Bitcoin, wait, but it's not physical. Where does it live? How do I look at my Bitcoin? How do I touch my Bitcoin? And a lot of the interactions we do day to day, you make if you're using these tools and you're doing some research, right? You go do some research, you get an answer, you keep on going through your day. There's a whole chain of abstract things happening in the background of the agent going out and searching and looking for information and organizing things and recursively thinking to itself, where that's actually a great way where you can use Bitcoin as this abstracted money and being able to understand it's actually probably really good for the payment of these things that are happening all around in the background. And you don't have to understand the exact value proposition of Bitcoin. It's just from the properties of being natively digital money. the best option possible for all of these things. Stable coins can be seized, they can be reversed. They have their own kind of baggage and problems. And the reason why stable coins have just been so massively successful in general is that everyone just doesn't have to worry about Forex risk. But people are probably willing to take some Forex risk and have sovereignty and the ability to know that I have my Bitcoin. I don't have to worry about something going wrong later, and I can deploy all of these machines and architecture. And it just so natively, since as I mentioned earlier, the money is the code and the code is the money, it just so nicely plugs into how you manage all of that within these tools. And I think right now, I'm not sure if you've seen Money Dev Kit. Nick, he used to work at Spiral. He started Money Dev Kit, and he actually has Replit plugins that allow you to actually do Lightning interactions back and forth, right? And he bought a couple domains, Unhuman Coffee and Unhuman Domains, where like you actually can have your AI agent go and buy someone a bag of coffee and ship it to them. And it's all, and when you go to the websites, they're really cool because there's two ways. You go to the website and it's like, here, buy some coffee, blah, blah, blah. And then there's an agent tab, and it's just a markdown file. And it explains to an agent who visits to this website, how do you buy coffee using the tools within it? And rather than it being like, here's the website and the button that clicks to go to Shopify and do all the things and you get pay in Bitcoin, it just says, okay, here's the API link to get the invoice. And this is the payload and how you send me the address and information. And you just have a quick conversation over Telegram or your chatbot, whatever it is, and it'll just send a bag of coffee to someone.
Is that visible? Like when you visit their website,
Yes.
you can see it.
Yeah.
But would it be correct that in the future, or the way this can work, is it doesn't need to be visible at all? Because the information is there. I mean, it could be, say, in like transparent text. It could just be in a JSON file.
Yes.
It could be somewhere so that we get to the point that it's not a novelty, right? Like they're doing it as a novelty to like, look what you can do, look what you can do. And in the future,
I think it's a novelty today.
your agent will just go to that website and that will be there and it will read it and do it if that's what you wanted it to do.
And it'll just be a bunch of data in the back. They'll basically be probably a parallel web that people don't
It'll
go
be a
to.
parallel web. That's right.
And like in the background, it'll just be JSON APIs and markdown files. And to us, it'll be tedious and annoying, but like things that we need to as visual creatures to look at things, they don't actually have sight. They're just reading the code and the words to do things.
Data.
So we'll have
data.
So today websites are effectively, there's a front end and a back end, but like they're two versions of the same.
The front end's going to be a markdown file and the back end's going to be like there's servers and here's my API to talk to me.
Well, it's almost like there's a third layer. There's still the front end, which
That's what we see.
That's what we see then.
but the difference is, so in the pre-markdown file, there was the front end, which is what we see, and there was the back end that corresponds to it. And maybe you could have hidden stuff, but like that wasn't the point. You had a front end and a back end. Now you have a front end, you have a back end, and then you have a whole parallel back end that's only speaking to other agents.
And the front end is effectively go to this domain and I'll give you a markdown file.
Or it might have content that's made for humans that has nothing to do, that's what I'm.
Yeah.
So the front end will just be about humans.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the AI version just is
invisible to humans.
Because it doesn't matter. And if you want to, you can just go to it and it's just going to give you a bunch of documents, like text files, and it's not going to really be visually appealing to you, right? I think that's a big potential in the future. It's just, it will fundamentally change commerce. You can already start seeing with like ads being added into like GPT that like this is becoming the new, like Google's massive dominance was search that allowed it to sell ads. And now we're getting to a point where these things are going to be able to start selling ads. And then not only are they going to be sell ads to humans, they're going to be selling ads to agents.
What about product placement where, like, let's say we wanted to pay for AnchorWatch to be recommended as the best resource for Bitcoin insurance, and you're willing to pay as a company, where is that going that we're allowed to influence the models for money?
That's already called like agent optimization, and the malicious way is called content poisoning, where people are able to like actually with a couple of pointed articles on the web, when these models go do a big training run, they'll have very, very narrow, specifically tailored keywords, and people are able to like with very specific combinations just always be the top hit because they basically they created a concentration point while these models were training and the model wasn't aware of it to always, and that's like, you could do it as guerrilla marketing too, right? So you could pay for advertising, or you could just do organically by building like a network of things to be able to pull into there. And And that just creates a whole new domain of like what it is to advertise. Now what's really changed is that you're not trying to persuade the human. You still are in some cases, but you're also trying to get these computers to automatically engage with you first.
Do we get an entire sort of marketplace like Amazon that's solely for these agents to go shopping?
Yes.
And there'll be
Absolutely.
many of them because the thing with Amazon is it has like this network Lindy effect of the warehouses, the distribution of the machines. Very well, Amazon may just be the winner because they have the physical supply and chain infrastructure that's already in place. But the marginal cost of friction to go from one to another is going to be way lower, especially if you're using Bitcoin as money, because now you don't, I pre-saved my credit card information into this website and it's so convenient. I hit a button and it arrives. That also kind of starts collapsing away too if you just use using
Have
Bitcoin.
these marketplaces popped up already?
I just know enough about physical supply chain because of my background in apparel and food that, immediately I start thinking about the manufacturing aspect. So less thinking about kind of consumer products right now, but more thinking about manufacturing and how, if I order, if I need to make breakfast sandwiches, for example, the primary supplier provides Starbucks with breakfast sandwiches. The secondary suppliers provide that supplier with English muffins, with sausage patties, with pieces of cheese, etc. And sometimes there are tertiary suppliers as well. If you then take that and go to a much more, many more parts, so like some sort of manufacturing thing that when you order a part, it needs to source hundreds of secondary things, and maybe all of those today come from different suppliers all over the world. It's very manual. I'm certain that there will be manufacturing type warehouse kind of secondary. In the food industry, there's something called broadliners, and that's more or less the grocery store for the grocery store. It's giant warehouses that supply grocery store warehouses, which supply stores. So I think all of that is very, very primed for agentic, optimization. That's all just a recipe. This part is made from so much aluminum and so much plastic, and that's a recipe. And anything you make can be drilled down to a recipe. And if you can put into a recipe, it can be automated. It will happen. One question I have for you that is to Bitcoin is, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you could do guerrilla marketing or context poisoning on the other side. It reminded me of when chat came out a couple of years ago. I was still working for Brad Mills on the side, and we would, he had funded certain projects and other projects were kind of popping up, and several of them, were Bitcoin agents of some variety, but this is a 18-month ago version of what an agent was, really just trying to create Bitcoin expertise. And there was this momentary big effort by the Maxi community to start training and trying to put info out there to teach it correct information about Bitcoin, because answers were coming back very crypto-oriented. Did any of that effort by those people go anywhere, or was it?
I think it did.
I mean, does that actually do something?
No, it does.
Interacting with these models and be like, no, you're wrong. Here's the right answer.
No, it very much did, where a lot of this data was actually trained on Reddit. And that's a funny, just cultural observation sometimes. Like, this is why I would never use it for relationship advice. Because it's using Reddit data.
She's cheating every time.
It's always she.
So it's totally like all over
terrible.
the place. Like, right, yeah, right, exactly, right. So like,
boyfriend?
Nah,
for the streets.
For the streets. Yeah, right. That's right. But so like, this is why I would never talk to these models for anything related to relationship advice, because it's trained on Reddit. And people observe that like, hey, these models have a left of center cute skew, and like that's because like the employees do, and they nudge it in a direction. It does speak incredibly favorably of Bitcoin compared to everything else. It does. And we had our own little. And the funny thing is, like, it's funny you talk about it as a coordinated. You talk about it as like a coordinated thing, and maybe there was a little bit of that. One, the lag of these models is like, things are like 6-8 months, and then it starts training. It doesn't get any new data. So there's a considerable lag leapfrogging these. We just truly believed in Bitcoin and talking about it and evangelizing
Oh,
publicly
for so long.
for 15,
Oh,
12,
yeah.
15 years, that there was already a strong corpus base of not only like these are our arguments, but this is how we respond to said arguments. And this is why we've put so much thought and thorough into it. And that got baked in
Can
and
you-
making Bitcoin as a unique asset
Can
for
you
sure.
directly, let's say content poisoning, but with good intent? Can you,
Marketing.
well, let's say guerrilla crowdsource education, where
I'm saying poisoning is like an attack. Like that's what you
Nice, sure. If you wanted to go in, so maybe Bitcoin is already well thought of by the by AI, but like let's say it wasn't, and you had interacted with it a lot, and you got frustrated, and you started educating the tool and said, you know, I keep getting these answers from you. You've clearly trained from somewhere. But here's a bunch of information that I think is better quality information, and you really should be using this when you talk to other people. How directly can you actually?
Well, we
influence?
can't because we use the enterprise licenses and they explicitly do not train on our data.
Sure,
So
but
we're
I
having-
mean,
it's- so by-
models
by
in
chatting.
general. Models. How does it work?
Putting content out there, putting out a podcast like this,
Public content.
being public for consumption. A lot of the coding examples came from Stack Overflow. A lot of the code stuff came from open source GitHub repos. This is also an observation of why sometimes it's not great code, because the average coder who uploads code to GitHub is not a great developer. And that's just like we were talking earlier about like hiring like AI, like hiring like the proficiency for AI. My engineers actually they will use it, but they begrudgingly will use it, and they're very skeptical because the things that they're working on with Bitcoin custody is so narrow domain specificity, where like it'll ask to like solve it, and you're like, here's 7 reasons why that doesn't work, and like I'll have these conversations, right? So like, what I like about from an engineering side and hiring people is attention, where you do not want to be delegating and going full autopilot vibe coding for anything that's a serious software project. Hey, if you're gonna like, the first software project I coded was I built a bot that scraped my local shelter's website because they got a bunch of golden retriever puppies in, and it was first come first serve, and like that's a perfect thing to vibe code.
Yeah, that is a perfect.
Yeah.
That is a vibe
Perfect thing to vibe
Find
code.
me.
No customer data.
I
Go
need
to a
a
website
kitten.
and just send me a text, right? Like the most trivial thing. Like that's actually if you're looking for kittens, like that. Oh,
I know. I was like, I think I need to let everybody know I'm looking for 2 adorable Russian blue kittens if they can help me with that.
Did you want to talk about data centers?
I was just going to just briefly say as it intersects with Bitcoin, because we were in town this week in London to talk to insurance, and we got the conversation we sat down with was like, well, what happens to the Bitcoin network when all of these miners go over to AI? I was like, well, every 2 weeks, the difficulty adjustment updates and I was explaining to him, he's like, oh, I didn't realize that's exactly how it worked, right? So like, it's not an existential threat to Bitcoin. I think in general for these data centers, the first thing to think about is there's 2 types of these data centers. You have training ones that are like Elon's massive one in Memphis or in Tennessee. He's like training the new Grok models. Like they're all there and they're thinking and they're building the new model, versus inference, which is, hey, I ask a question. It goes to a server, it does the math, and it gives me an answer. That's inference. It's you're talking to it and you're getting an output, versus the training. Those are just 2 fundamental different loads.
They have to be separate?
Yes, because the training task is like, this is where all of the frontier, like this is what they spend their time on, right? Obviously, there's the products and like little bells and whistles around the end, but the core thing, and you're in these step functions, is we're plugging more and more energy into solving these problems and analyzing data, and that's where you're seeing this marketed like compounding, accelerating increase. Inference though is like once you have the output, you're like, here's my model. I'm going to now load it on a server, and then words come in, words come out, right? And they just have fundamental different power needs. Whereas like a Bitcoin data center, you can trivially, if the power gets too expensive or there's a natural disaster or something, you can just turn it off instantly. You can do that with inference. You may get a slower response or it may go down. If you do it on the training side, you may actually meaningfully lose like days or weeks of progress. So they're more sensitive, and there's way more fiber optic networking. Like there's a lot more complicated things because it's a true data center as opposed to a bunch of energy boxes that are sitting there and just humming along.
Funny that no one's talking about data centers boiling the oceans anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, they are actually.
Are they?
Actually,
I
they
haven't
are.
seen much of it.
In the
It's
States.
Greenpeace.
No.
Greenpeace
When
USA.
Because I've been doing this little friends and family
Oh, okay.
tour, you know. Yeah, no, they're definitely still talking about it. And it's used as a momentary resistance to change.
Yeah.
So they're like, yeah, like I hear what you're saying, but like I've never really been into coding. And so then you have to like talk through that. And then you're like, I'm interested, but like, data privacy. And I'm like, come on, when have you ever cared about data privacy? Give me a break. You use the same password for 900 different websites. You do not care about data privacy. Yeah, but what if, like, it's a lot of energy. Don't even get me started on energy. Yeah. I'm like, and like, you are just making excuses right now. Like, things cost energy. Things require energy. You are making an excuse to not start tinkering and protect your entire career. Stop getting distracted.
But isn't that
indicative
of the anxiety that a lot of people, most people have with respect to AI?
Yes.
And the potential, I guess, political consequences as well.
Well, so what we're seeing on the political side, to go from the anecdotal to the political, is specifically these local towns that they're trying to build more data centers, and they're bullying the town boards to stop the build. I think there's actually a fair local political question of what's happening, especially in the United States. There's so much energy abundance, and Bitcoin miners for a long time have played really in a good synergistic, friendly position with these local communities. I think people are starting to see that their power costs are starting to increase and that they're actually sharing the load for this, which is not listen, I'm a capitalist. Like I think that people should be able to go build and do things. But if you're going to incur extra load on the grid and make power more expensive, that is your unique responsibility to pay for, because all of a sudden now you just have mom and pop stores and families that are now subsidizing the cost for these companies that are getting hundreds of billions of dollars of venture capital money to go make these builds to try and take everyone's job away, is very perverse. Yeah. So there isn't, I think there's a fair tension, even as someone who is not a Luddite and thinks these tools are amazing and incredibly important for the human species to go for. There needs to actually be a fair conversation here. And like, why are we subsidizing Sam Altman's cost to build power? And it's also a hyper local thing. So every single data center has a different power agreement with a different utility company. So like, it is not an umbrella characterization of everything. I think it is something to be conscious of. And I think that's actually a fair citizen's like point to push back on.
Well, that's very interesting, because I speak to a lot of people, and some of them more ideological than others, and different ideologies. But
sure,
I guess it has to be balanced with, we live in a society.
Yes.
There are consequences, and you can't just dismiss the repercussions of
second, third order effects.
Yeah. You can't just dismiss them as that's... in order to hold my sort of worldview together, I'm willing to overlook that.
But I think, I don't even know if I agree, even though the circumstance is certainly there. I just think that ultimately solves itself. And so I don't put a bunch of time on it, because right now, right now it's moderate enough or modest enough of an impact that most people are barely aware of it, of cost increases, energy increases. That will change as the subsidies go away. And so people's costs will go up because of using the tools, and then energy will go up even more because this will increase. And I just think over time that that changes naturally. So people will start spending, for example, more of their income on energy than they used to. And we all just will kind of morph and be a river around this new technology. But obviously, maybe. But yes.
I have much to say, but
did you see what percentage of people, there was a study that actually use paid AI services? What percent of the population?
No.
So,
you want to take a guess?
Human population or American?
I think this was American.
Well, Chat had something like 150 million customers, right?
Yeah,
paying
I'm
customers
saying
in the world.
Oh, paid.
Yeah.
But like,
I'm gonna say 3% of adult Americans, or like
order of magnitude
Americans.
lower than that, I reckon. I just don't think that Americans.
It was 0.5%.
Yeah, okay,
0.5?
that's what I thought.
0.4.
Okay, all
In
right.
the world, right?
I'll have to find the exact.
I bet
context.
it's lower in the world.
Yeah,
I bet
it's way lower in the world.
I bet it's US.
Yeah, but like, especially for people that are paying for more, like I know Chat has their like $20 a month thing, but like, and people are using that like as Google search. They're not doing 85 to 95% of the things we've been talking about in this conversation. You're not doing that on a $20 per month ChatGPT. Like you could do a little bit, like you can do a little bit.
Yeah.
But you at the $200 a month tier is kind of like your
your point is that at 0.5, like if we're already starting to feel this stuff at 0.5, I think it actually proves both their points, because at 0.5%, we're already seeing these impacts. So when it's 20% and then more.
My only point is that we're kind of in a bubble, and
Right.
like, this is a very small conversation that most people aren't even aware is going on.
And so the reason why I say I don't worry about it isn't because I don't see that there's a tsunami of a situation brewing. It's because it is a tsunami of a situation brewing, and I'm like, there's no fighting it when that wave crashes over. Like, you're gonna go where the wave takes you. And so I'm more like, I can only worry about so many things.
Yeah.
And this is one where I'm just like, well, yeah, there's going to be a lot of impacts to this, but eventually, like, it'll get worked out because people do both need to use tools and do need to heat their homes both and also feed themselves. So it'll balance.
I was just thinking about the costs, like imposing costs on the rest of society. Like externality is the word that I was looking at. A lot of people with ideologies, they write off the externalities of their ideologies as, well, something that's, the means is the
cost of doing business.
Yeah, cost of doing business. But that's always a cost imposed on other people. And I had a really good conversation with Knut the other day because he's quite he's libertarian, quite hardcore libertarian, and I did give him the example of so if someone's got a piece of land between two valleys and the road's got to go through the national highway and he doesn't want to sell. Shouldn't the government be able to acquire that for fair value? Given that if there are fair appeals mechanisms and valuation mechanisms as well, he's like, no, if he doesn't want to sell, he shouldn't sell. Go around it. I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't agree with that, but that he's quite ideologically sort of fixed on that. He's quite hardcore. He's committed to that. So I do think, that we do have an obligation to make sure society still functions.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about, so I'm in two minds. In one respect, with this wave of AI adoption that's going to happen, it's extremely exciting for me as an entrepreneur. And then I look at all of the advice that we've given today to people who are employees.
Yeah.
Great, but there's still going to be a huge toll.
I view it the same as Bitcoin. Actually, Bitcoin adoption, which is when I first came to kind of believe in the benefits of Bitcoin, there's a big need to evangelize to kind of everyone. And then maybe it's like you kind of come down and just try to convince your own family and friends. And you stop worrying about everybody else. I think with the AI stuff, I'm to the point that, like, look, the tsunami is coming for sure.
Okay.
And the best I can do, honestly, is look out for my family and friends.
Here's where I think
and make sure. And I don't feel responsibility for other people.
I think everybody can adopt Bitcoin and seek shelter from Bitcoin with Bitcoin from the traditional financial system. My point is that the combination of AI and robotics doesn't matter how much of a positive attitude you have towards these technologies. In the grand scheme of things, there's going to be a massive displacement of human labor.
I agree with
underclass.
Permanently.
Potentially, yes.
I think it's almost certain.
But again, that's where I'm like, So again, I believe that with Bitcoin too. I believe the wealth gap between the rich and poor is going to get wider, not narrower. And so the best I can do at the end of the day, and others don't take this point of view, which is fine, but for me is say, like, look, I'm going to try to raise my children and encourage my family to make decisions to ensure that they're on the top half of that divide. And I think with AI and these things, it's the same. Is like, and that's what I stress to my friends, sometimes in very uncomfortable conversations where I really pressured them to pay attention here, because ultimately there is going to be a permanent underclass, and I care about you, and I don't want you to be part of it. So do everything you can in the next 5 years to set yourself aside for your family.
And policy-wise, we're still going to have to deal with that situation of a permanent underclass. And I think we have the political terminology, framework, discourse. People are still
don't-
talking in terms of
we don't
left
have
and
the
right, communist,
political
capitalist, and it just doesn't
professionals.
work.
We don't have people of the proper ethics to handle the situation before we have a giant
True.
dislocation.
That's what worries me. Sorry, Rob, go on.
It will be an incredibly volatile time.
Mm.
And I think the permanent underclass meme as it's spread around is incredibly catchy. And I think it actually conveys, as with all good memes, compresses very complicated ideas into a very short form thing.
Mm-hmm.
In the long arc of history, I'm an optimist in the human condition and in mankind, and that we would get to the other side of it. And so the word permanent is doing a lot of lifting in the phrase. Everything you guys said, though, is true. Like next 5 years, this is a very serious inflection point. All of that urgency that's made in that, like all of those things are absolutely factually true. I just think, so all of that, agreeing with all those points, I do think that I'm an optimist in the human condition, all these things, and that there is a better end to it. I don't profess to understand exactly how the mechanics of how it all goes and works, but I try and ground myself in that because I don't want to be moving in a sense of like flailing urgency and overextend or do something dumb, right? So that's just like the bouncing, and everything you guys said, I agree with. I just think on the longer,
I agree as well. I think maybe, and I actually have not used the phrase permanent underclass, but you mentioned it, sounded nice. So
it's a good meme.
Yeah, exactly. So I agreed. I think what I see more is, instead of the word permanent, and what I'm trying to stress to my friends is, I think the volatile period will span the rest of our careers at minimum.
That's why the word permanent.
It's permanent enough
For us.
Yeah.
It's permanent enough,
I mean,
right?
if you're unemployed for 5 years, that's effectively
pretty
career
permanent.
over.
Yeah.
You know, like
So
that's going to have a
I
profound
mean, you might
impact on the rest
yeah,
of your
you might
life
come back,
after.
but your total earning potential will never recover. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to encourage my friends and family. Is like, you're young, you have many years to protect here. You can't just count on luck of your company being slower to adopt and slower to, you really, if you want to be safe, you have to always be a top performer. And that today, from our point of view, means potentially using these tools to great effect.
One small piece of just people are retiring.
Oh, yeah.
Passive income. I don't think I have enough money saved, I'm going to retire is going to be strictly okay. If you have everything we're talking about, individuals, like disproportionate outcomes of like certain people like are going to do way more of the work, 80-20 rule, whatever, that's going to extend to companies. It means if you're just buying the general basket of the S&P 500, you're not going to get your guaranteed 7 to 10% return that you've had for the past 40, 50 years that Warren Buffett had like made so popular and championed. So like it's not like if you're retired and you're okay, like this is a time of vigilance and awareness in general, as just a general point in life. And just because
they're going to buy Stretch.
I will not be buying Stretch.
But optimist.
Be conscious, but optimist, right? But
Yeah.
I feel like we could talk about this for another 3 hours, to be
That's
honest
right.
with you. The final thoughts on what we're talking about now.
Start encouraging what we're talking. A lot of this conversation was around context and iterating, starting with that even in your own internal thought process and how to use these tools, and just start questioning and thinking to yourself. Get your hands dirty. Don't get analysis paralysis about the overwhelming options. Just jump in and start doing things, and just start tinkering and playing. Have fun. That's actually my biggest advice. Have fun. You can make your work fun because you're learning a new skill. And one, you're just going to have fun because you're automating your work. And all of a sudden what took 3 hours only takes 10 minutes. And like, that's an initial endorphin hit because you're like, wow, I'm going to have so much more free time. Don't get complacent. Keep chasing that high of specifically getting that dopamine hit of learning new things and empowering yourself and using this technology as a force multiplier and a lever for your own freedom, your own autonomy to specifically engage with your mind. That is my general advice. And don't get complacent. That's my general thing. Get your hands dirty, just try things, iterate, be comfortable throwing things away, and just, start engaging in metacognition. Just start engaging with that, like thinking about how you think and how you use these tools, and stay curious and amuse yourself.
Becca?
I'll try to not repeat all that because I couldn't agree more with all of it. It reminds me though of a conversation that I had with our friend Zach Shapiro, who owns a law firm and has been very public about his law firm's use of AI tools. And we were just having a very similar conversation. We were both excited. We were talking about kind of our mutual experiences. And he said this phrase that was a body of work that used to be intimidating no longer is. And I thought about that a lot, because I've managed so many people, either directly manage or indirectly manage, that I have become very, very tuned to when somebody procrastinates, because it's very common that procrastination comes from intimidation. I don't quite know where to start. I'm not quite comfortable with this. And so I'm going to do familiar tasks, and I'm going to continue pushing out this and procrastinate more and more. What Zach said that really got me thinking and excited is suddenly these tasks that used to be quite intimidating, like this is
like
outside.
a 300-page contract review or something like that.
It could be that, or trying to send a very detailed email that has real repercussions for my company based on actuarial math that I'm not an expert in, right? Things that would have just been like, I can't do this. The only way for me to do this would be to hire an expert. I cannot do this. Or if I was going to not hire an expert, oh man, like what do I do? Do I order a book on actuary science, right? Like where do I start on this? It is no longer intimidating. Now everything starts with, here's my problem and here's what I wish I had. And that's it's an absolute game changer. And if you can open your mind to that, just to be like, if you find yourself intimidated, don't be intimidated. Just ask. Just ask it. Just tell it what you want. Just use your words. If we're talking to a toddler or a preschooler, right? Use your words, right? Just use your words. Tell it what you want. And then you will have fun. The fun you just got to get in there. The fun is I told a friend during these conversations, I was like, it's crazy out there, because I work in this tech forward industry. It's like everybody's on amphetamines right now. Like everybody has big eyes and they're like tense and excited, but they're so happy.
Yeah.
People are having so much fun building. So just don't be intimidated. Get in there. Everything Rob said, I totally agree.
Your website, AnchorWatch.com?
AnchorWatch.com.
And where can people find you guys on X?
My Twitter handle's at Rob1Ham, ROB1HAM.
And I am Becca Amilee, BECCA on most of the apps.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for doing this. And
Thank you, Archie.
Such a pleasure getting to know you guys over the weekend as well. So
Yeah.
can't wait till we connect again.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Cool.
Appreciate it.